Thanks so much for joining us right here on The Right View. Tonight, we are so excited to be joined by Congresswoman from the great state of Florida, our friend, Representative Paulina Luna, Congresswoman. And now I can introduce you as that. Congratulations. You've been in office just over 2 months now. I know that this has been something you've been working on for quite some time. How is it going? Give us kind of an update in your first couple of months.
Well, it's, I think, been pretty successful. A lot of people, I think, once they come to Washington, it really is what you make of it. So the workload that we've really taken on is something that, I frankly enjoy it. I'm passionate about these issues, but I also have a really supportive team. And so I was one of the 20 that engaged in the speaker negotiations, obviously huge wins for the American people. The Republican Party is united, and now we're actually looking, at least with oversight, into some of the corruption that we're finding in Washington and hoping to bring that forth to the American people.
Yeah, I think the American people, by the way, are so relieved in so many respects to see that we have, a Republican majority in the House because gosh, look at the things. And I'm just, in the past couple of days, the things that I've seen happen and come forward, like finally getting a view at all of the footage from the January 6th tapes. Wonder why we weren't given all of that information and allowed to see all of that whenever we had a different Speaker of the House in there. But something that I know you're passionate about and you've been fighting since well before you got into office is big tech, and specifically how they refused to verify your Twitter account, even though you were the Republican nominee when you ran for the first time back in 2020. Now, I know it was a small victory, but how good does it feel knowing that some angry Twitter employee begrudgingly had to verify your accounts as you became Congresswoman? And then kind of tell us what's going on with big tech and moving forward on that front.
Well, so, initially when we were, I think, back in 2016 and then 2018, a lot of conservatives were like, we're getting suppressed,
Yeah.
At first, you had the left that was really gaslighting Americans saying, oh, that's not happening. And then these legal arguments came out. So, yes, my campaign actually in 2020 did sue Twitter. And the crazy thing is that the FEC, so our Federal Elections Commission, ultimately said that the laws of Congress were out of date in regards to giving candidates, especially, fair access to these platforms like you would on any other form of media, whether it's print, digital, or television. And that it was the right by Twitter to censor me, even though I was a congressional candidate, because it was a private company. Well, as part of being on oversight, we actually brought in some of the former Twitter executives a couple of weeks back.
Right.
And we did find that these executives were actively working on a private cloud server called Jira, and they were actively suppressing people information even prior to January 6th. And I bring that up for one reason in particular. They were trying to say that it was Republicans that were, quote unquote, inciting violence, but they were the ones that were controlling all the information out there. So in finding this, we find out not only were they lying to the American people, they had the full ability to control everything that was being posted, but they were also working with government entities like CISA, which was under DHS. And so that's known as a joint state actor. It's highly illegal. They were doing it without any accountability, any oversight. And so, it is little victories like that. Obviously, it confirms what we knew. But what's more important is that it's giving us the foundation to write the legislation so that it doesn't happen again. And as you know, Laura, being a mother, this is really how the younger generation is absorbing all information, is on social media. And so we have a big task at hand, but we have some great thought leaders, whether it's Chip Roy, Representative Comer, a lot of even Jim Jordan, that are helping to write some of this legislation that we're going to be now voting on. And hopefully when your father-in-law gets reelected in 2024, we'll be able to actually get that on the books for good.
Oh, from your lips. I sure hope so. I'm just honestly, I think that you're right. This is truly it's very detrimental to our upcoming generations, and they are so easily swayed by what they see, what information they're able to access, specifically on social media. And I know, with this show, with, you look at my father-in-law being taken off of Twitter, yet you've got terrorists allowed to remain on Twitter. Those sorts of things, people look at that and they say, this is not how America is supposed to conduct itself. It's very un-American. And I think and antithetical to everything that we stand for as Americans, to see the censorship and really the suppression of our voices as conservatives online. And so I just want to say thank you on behalf of all Americans for everything you're doing, because it shouldn't matter whether or not you agree with someone's viewpoint on something. We all have the same constitutional right to be able to voice our opinions on things and allow our voices to be heard. So I think what you're doing is so important, not just now, but for the future of America. So thank you on behalf of the American people. And by the way, you're talking about when you guys had those Twitter executives appearing before Congress, you could tell, by the way, just watching, you didn't even need to have any sound on. These people were very nervous because they probably knew what they were doing at the time was wrong, but for some reason they continued to do it. I assume, do you think they just thought that no one would call them on it, that they would never be caught at some point and never, nothing would ever happen to them?
I think that they never anticipated that someone like Elon Musk would put up that much money to buy Twitter. It is pretty incredible that he did that. He didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
One of the most impressive things, though, is that not only did he do that, but then he gave us access to information that we needed to, as legislators, write the laws. And that's incredibly important. But, Yoel Roth perjured himself to me. He knowingly, I had a screenshot with him actively communicating in this chat forum. And ultimately, as a result of that, he knew what he was doing. He lied. He denied it. And then I brought out the screenshots, and you could just see his face completely change, completely just like turn ghost white. But, it is important because this is not just the only company that's doing this. We have it happening on Facebook, Instagram, Google, YouTube. And more importantly, I think moving forward, in the midterms as a prime example, we were grossly outspent as Republicans, as conservatives, but it's because they are suppressing all of our campaign fundraising emails. They're going to spam. They're suppressing our message. And when you look at the metrics of voters, younger voters, the Gen Z voters actually outpassed the baby boomer generation in voting. And they were largely voting left wing because of social media. So it's social media that's being used, weaponized to target and that get people to vote. And so I think that that's important to note, that if we are going to be viable in future races, not only as Republicans are we going to have to really focus on the grassroots, which is one thing that I've been able to do in my campaign, but then also too that we have to emphasize that big tech is interfering. We have to have the legislation in place to protect us.
Yeah, well, go get them. We love to hear it. I love your story and sort of your background. So, and for people who maybe aren't super familiar with it, from what I understand, you were raised by a single mom, and you were raised in California, of all places, and you decided, to go into the armed forces. You joined the Air Force after you kind of left home. And did you know at that point that you wanted sort of a life of service? Because it seems like, you joined the military, and of course that is serving our country. And thank you, of course, for your service. And now you are serving in a different capacity. Was this kind of always something you saw in your future?
I had initially wanted to go into medicine, and what my story is not your average legislators. Like I grew up within the welfare system. I saw a lot of traumatic stuff growing up. My dad, who I love a lot, passed away in January, but he ultimately had a very bad drug addiction, and then he was killed in an auto accident. So I've seen a lot. My story, though, is very threatening to people on the left, because what it means is that if you are born into this country, because of the laws and really the foundation that our founding fathers gave us, that if you work hard, you can really attain anything. Here I am now, a sitting member of Congress, having gone through all of that, and they will try to undermine and undercredit that story. The Washington Post, 2 days after I did that hearing with Twitter, did a hit piece on me claiming that I was a Democrat, claiming that I had fabricated my father's incarceration records, of which I provided Time magazine with his full DOJ report showing that he was indeed incarcerated. They reached out to my mom, Laura, and asked my mom for my grandmother's death certificate proving that she was HIV positive.
Oh my gosh.
But it wasn't just that. We knowingly saw the reporter that wrote the story intentionally leave out information from other people that they interviewed that discredited and debunked their narrative about me. So they tried to basically paint me as a liar. It's important, though, that young women who run for office, that people that do have my story don't take that as what it is, because this is about service. I felt like this was a calling. My story allows me to think about things from a different lens and perspective through a legislation angle, but it also allows me to connect with other people that I think wouldn't typically get involved in politics. And I tell my story not because I want people to feel bad, but because there's a lot more people around this country that have my story. And I think that it empowers people to realize that, like, you don't have to be a victim. You can really embrace that. And just because you're born into that doesn't mean that you're less than. In fact, it makes you more powerful because you can empathize. And so I basically threw it back in the Washington Post face, and I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing. And it's basically working out so far.
God, I mean, good for you. You know what? It's so sick and it's so sad. And people who have never experienced that and had something like that happen to them, where someone or an entity is knowingly either writing a story or putting out a news story on television about you, and they conveniently leave out information that completely changes the direction of the story and the entire meaning of it. And I mean, it's so awful that it happens. And then as a quote unquote public figure, which, you know, obviously you are, I guess I am in some respect, you really don't have any recourse. It's very hard to then come back from that, because even if you get these people to print a retraction or something, the damage is already done. I mean, it's sort of, yeah, it's the same mentality, I think, with the goals of the January 6th committee and that whole charade and nonsense. They knew from the beginning they had nothing, and they sold the American people a false bill of goods, knowing they just wanted to damage Republicans and President Trump. But I'm sorry, I just get really worked up about it. Go ahead with your thought.
No, you're absolutely correct. You know, as public figures, it's really hard to be able to sue someone for that. And realistically, if they're going after your name, I mean, they were harassing my mom. They were writing her at her work. It was insane. Then they were interviewing people that were knowingly lying about me. So it's like, you know, you understand, and I hate to say it, but it is kind of part of the job that you expect it's going to happen. If they don't have anything on you, they will simply make it up. But the one thing I actually really thought about, honestly, is like the amount of stuff that your family put up with for the last 4 years. And I was like, these people have spines of steel to be able to actually go through that every single day. And then you realize that the corporate, the corporate media machine is alive and well. And if you even dare step out of their box of what they want you to think and believe, they're either going to completely silence you, or they'll try to destroy you, but they're not going to give you a fair shake at voicing your platform. And so it's been interesting, because now the way that I see it working kind of on the inside of Washington, how the media works with these special interest groups, we're angling it and we're going on offense. And it's kind of interesting because my team is fairly young, but we're savvy with tech. And so that's kind of where they didn't anticipate us to excel. So they try to hit us, and it just seems to have the Barbara Streisand effect, and we're using it to our advantage.
I love it. Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, why do you think that you have the target on your back that I kind of feel like they've painted on you really since getting elected? Why do you think that you're such a threat to them?
I think it's because I'm effective in communicating ideas, and then also too, I'm not controlled. So a lot of my funding came from people, average people, $13. That is who I'm funded by. You know, if politicians wore NASCAR jackets, mine literally would say like very either conservative organizations and then the American people. And I think that they don't like that. You know, conservative policies are effective. I can beat out anyone that's on the other side in regards to policy debate. And I really do try to make sure that, you know, when I am debating these ideas, that I don't go personal with them, but also too, they can't help but go personal with us. So for example, you know, I wore a pin for co-sponsoring a bill for the Second Amendment. And they were trying to say that I was a child killer. And mind you, I mean, first of all, that's an insane thing to call someone. But I also survived an armed robbery. I survived a home invasion. And I was at a high school where there was a gang shooting, one of the 6 high schools I went to. So like, to call me that is insanely tone deaf. But then also too, it's like the fact that I'm a minority woman, and they don't want minority women, especially those that are Hispanic, because now the largest voting minority in the country are Hispanic Americans, to be able to actually have a voice and a platform. And so, you know, it is what it is, but I'm not your average breakfast taco. And so I'm going to be pushing back.
Oh my gosh, good for you. You know, you bring up the your Second Amendment pen. I went with some girlfriends recently to a range, just a standard gun range. And my husband and a friend of ours who are big Second Amendment advocates as well, but big shooters and very responsible, as I think most gun owners in America are, took us out to kind of shoot. Some of my friends had never really handled a firearm before, and so they wanted to give us this experience. And we posted a photo, of course, at the end. Everything that was unloaded and everything was done properly, but we all post in a photo holding guns. The comments I got on this photo about how, like, what a disgusting human being I am because I was holding a gun in a photo, and shouldn't I be ashamed of myself because kids, to your point, kids are being murdered by this. I'm like, you know what? I'm not the problem. We are very responsible people, and we respect guns, and we want to learn gun safety and teach gun safety. But people have no idea what they're talking about out there. But I often feel like they must be paying these people to put this ridiculous commentary under a photo like that or about your pen. I mean, right? Because it's so outrageous
too. So like, here's something for those that might not know. They actually have bot farms that will like just go and spam the exact same thing with the same comment. But it's always interesting. I've never felt the need to like go to someone's social media profile and like just talk smack. Like, who has time to
You mean because you're busy, because you're actually doing things? Yeah.
I'm happy with my life. I just, people that troll, it's usually, I think, says more about them than you, right? But
it's
to see the amount of people that are just uninformed. And also another fact is, like, you really want to talk about child safety. I mean, can we please address what's happening at the border? Like, these people that are, they're the first ones to say, yes, let's send funding to Ukraine and arm Ukrainians, but we can't arm Americans. Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's why the frustration level at this point for the American people is like at an all-time high. People are just sick of it. There's so much hypocrisy and so much nonsense. I want, before we go with you, to get a little more information from you about this military records leak that you appear to be in the middle of. I don't think enough people are aware of it. If you wouldn't mind, just kind of give us a brief overview of it and tell us what's going on.
So this is going to be like actually a little bit longer just because the way that we found out was so nefarious. So right before the Washington Post hit piece came out, we had actually had a reporter from the New York Times reach out to my former ratings supervisor. So someone that does something called an EPR, it's called an enlisted performance report. And that's all private information, right? So that's not going to be easily foiable to any reporter because it's my ratings on how I performed when I was a service member. So reaches out, and my sergeant from 13 years ago now actually sent me a message and was like, hey, just, the New York Times is asking about you, said that they knew I was
always a great feeling. Always a great feeling.
Right. And so I thought that was interesting because I'm like, how does the New York Times find this information? So I flagged it to Scalise, Representative Scalise, whose leadership in the RNC, and then also to he elevated it to Representative Rogers from House Armed Services. So that was the first thing. It was interesting. I was like, they had to have obtained my records, but I didn't have proof yet. And then about 10 days later, we heard that there was a massive leak from the Air Force contacting 12 members of Congress to let them know that their records were leaked. So I started then reaching out to a few other Air Force candidates that ran for office to see if they also had their records were leaked. And sure as heck, Jaron Majewski had his private information leaked. He had an Article 15, which is a punitive action taken, but that was leaked to the Associated Press. You had Jennifer Ruth Green, who I spoke to directly, that back in November had her records were leaked to Politico. They were given privately, which also had annotated that she was sexually assaulted. And then you had my anomaly case, of which I wasn't contacted by anyone, but I knew that the New York Times had obtained my records. And so in hearing all of that, I was like, all right, we have an issue here. So Comer, which is the chairman of the House Armed Services, or House Oversight, and Chairman Rogers, who's the chairman of House Armed Services, did a letter together writing the Air Force to request information on whether or not there was a leak. And so they had until, I believe it was February 27th to get back to us with all of the records. And on February 27th, the Department of the Air Force said that they needed more time. They were still contacting people and then to give us the official records. So I've actually now, since then, not only did I write my own record to expand the net of search to see where the leaks were coming from. But I also too am suing with Judicial Watch for those records because we're going to run forensics on them. But the fact is that in no way, shape, or form, first of all, the Air Force said that it was a lower ranking enlisted individual that leaked those records. And from what we're hearing in this investigation, it was a GS-12, which is the significant of a captain and or major in the military that leaked it. So obviously it was a low ranking person. And secondly, why was it only Republican candidates for office? Why was it not Democrats? And they should know better than to leak all of this very private information to include Social Security record, all of it. So there's going to be some big issues for these guys.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you're naming off people, that of course that's what everyone wants to know. Why is it that only the Republicans had their information leaked? I mean, there's just so much. Well, I just want to say, as someone who has kind of watched your journey now for, you know, a couple of years and the path you've been on, I want to say on behalf of all of us, of women, of, you know, your supporters, we are so proud of you and so excited for your future, because obviously they're scared of you. And there's a reason, like we just said, but you're doing amazing things. Please keep it up. We know that you're going to continue a good fight. We know that we got to get you back on the floor because you got another fight coming up in a few minutes. But as you're going forward, I know that it's very early on. Is there anything in your first term in office that you hope to accomplish or that you're already working on right now before we let you go?
Yeah, so I actually just launched my first bipartisan bill that I actually managed to get Democrat co-sponsors on, and it's actually to prevent sexual assault in the military. So it's a phenomenal concept. We're going to have military members one day a month across the board, whether it's the Army, Air Force, Coast Guard, whoever, take a mandatory self-defense training course to prevent sexual assault. And it's going to be for men and women. But unfortunately, the military doesn't have mandatory combatives training for all service members, and we should. And so it's going to be a bipartisan bill. We're introducing it actually today. And so hopefully we'll get that passed.
Yeah, I love that. That's kind of shocking that there's not mandatory self-defense. I mean, I kind of feel like people assume that that's there, but good for you. That's fantastic. Well, we're watching. We're cheering you on from the sidelines. Keep up the awesome work, and we'll check back in and we'll see how things are going. But keep up the good fight for all of us here watching. And Congresswoman Paulina Luna, thank you for joining us here on The Right View today. And to everybody at home, as always, thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here next time for more.